Hi, my name is Carl Valeri. I'm the host of the Stuck Mic AvCast, and we have an exciting episode for you today. You know, home flight simulation is not only a fun hobby, but it'll help you with real-world flight training. Now we have the statistics to prove it. Joining us today is Evan Reiter to discuss how you can benefit from home flight simulation in the upcoming FlightSimExpo 2024. Hey, Evan, how you doing?
Hey, Carl. Thanks so much for having us. I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. I'm excited to have you on. We've had you on before, and it's always great to talk to you. I'm always excited about flight simulation, not just because I do it for a living, but I also love to do it for fun.
Yes.
Amazingly enough. And that's and what's amazing is how many people have really gotten into aviation, general aviation, just because of flight simming, and also as careers too.
Yeah, me being one of them right here, absolutely.
And I was going to say you are one of them, and so am I. I mean, the old days of flight simulation, 1985, monochrome screen. That's where I got my start.
Nice.
And that was it was actually an amber screen. Amber screen is what I had on a compact, the old compact computer.
I had one of
so it
those.
was just a big.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
I'm old enough for
it's
that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was like a family computer down in the basement. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, before we get started, though, I know a lot of people want to know about those free scholarships. We always talk about those in the beginning of the show. Though we have that scholarships guide where you can actually get scholarships to do your flight training and for many other things in aviation. Maybe it's management. You also want to do an additional rating. So if this inspires you to go out and start flight training, I highly recommend you checking that out. And you can find it, aviationcareerspodcast.com/scholarships. You can get a free one by using the coupon code PAYITFORWARD. How do you find that coupon code? aviationcareerspodcast.com/free. To find out more about how you can pay it forward and help other people, go to aviationcareerspodcast.com/payitforward. Also, another cool thing, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, is that we love the Flight Simulation Association, Flight SimExpo, so much that we actually sponsor a discount code if you become a member, the Flight Sim Association, and they have that coupon on their website. And Evan, where would they find that if they became a member?
Yeah, so our website is FlightSimAssociation.com, and of course you can learn about all the details and many of the discounts available to you. One of them is the one that you mentioned, and you can see that if you click on our discounts tab up at the top in the menu. You'll see all 60 plus different partner benefits, perks, and discounts, including our friends at the Stuck Mic and Aviation Careers podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. So, Evan, let's talk about this Flight Sim Expo first, because that's coming up right around the corner, June 21st through 23rd. I know I said I was going to be there, but as people know, I have this. I know I'm crying, and my job
comes. Make it any easier for you, am I?
No, you're not at all. I mean, I've been trying so hard to get there, and it's kind of like Oshkosh for me. It's just one of those things at the time of year. I'm super junior in the base I'm in. I just moved to Orlando. I can drive to work, but then the downside is I don't get the days off I want. I can't get weekends off. This is on a weekend, unfortunately, but I will be there watching you guys and cheering you on. I am a big fan of this Flight Sim Association. As everybody knows that's ever listened to my podcast, done any career coaching with me, it's one of the first things I tell people they should do is go check out this association. But if you get a chance and you want to go to Vegas, I highly recommend going to the Flight Sim Expo. So, Evan, what are people going to see when they get there?
Yeah, so Flight Sim Expo is our annual convention, so kind of the way that Oshkosh is EAA's annual convention, Flight Sim Expo is the Flight Sim Association annual convention, and it is like all of home flight simulation all in one place. So it is everything from new hardware, new product releases, every single flight sim platform you can imagine, Microsoft Flight Sim and X-Plane, of course, but also GeoFS, Infinite Flight, the mobile flight sim platform. We've got Xbox there. You can pretty much try this in any form or flavor that you'd like. Full motion simulators, full A320 cockpit will be there once again. We've got our VR Experience Center coming back this year. So if you imagine anything you can think about or know about home flight simulation, and even some of the big stuff that you have at work, all of that is there at our show, Flight Sim Expo.
How about for the newbie? I mean, it sounds a little overwhelming. Am I going to get lost when I walk in the door?
No, and in fact, one of the things that we really work on for this show is to make it a place for people to come and discover this hobby. So we do have a number of seminars specific to those brand new to home flight simulation, and each day on Saturday and Sunday, where our exhibit hall is open, we actually have a free tour where a couple of experienced simmers will take you on a tour of the show floor and point out the things that you should try over the rest rest of the weekend. It's actually one of the best places to come if you are new to flight simulation, because here's the thing, where else can you go to try this stuff, right? You can't go to your local FBO and try 20 different flight sim controls. If you're super lucky, they might have a flight simulator there with some set of flight sim controls, but just one of probably 150, 200 different potential configurations that you might have. And you'll be able to see and try all of that at our show. So it really is a great place for people who are new to the hobby, thinking about building a home flight simulator, to actually come to, as I say, between the tours, the workshops, and just the fact that you can sit down and try all this stuff. It's actually a great place to get started.
You know, one of the things that I think is really cool about FlightSimExpo is the fact that you have some really cool speakers there. So who can we expect to see this year?
Yeah, again, a nice variety of everyone from flight simulation developers, so people like Microsoft or Laminar Research, people who actually make the simulators, through to individual members of our community who might be talking about how to get started or how to fly the home flight simulator effectively, especially if you want to use it for training. We've even got a few smaller workshops that are going to deal with, what if I'm a student pilot and I want to, use this toward potentially getting some hours in my logbook. How could I do that? Or even, do I want to do that? All of those types of seminars are actually happening at the show as well. And of course, details about the show and our full schedule is all available now at the website, which is FlightSimExpo.com.
You know, another cool thing about some of the speakers and the experts there is it gets kind of granular. So, for instance, if you're somebody who's interested in, say, helicopters, flight sim, and they're actually, I think you're going to have someone there this year that's going to show up.
Yeah, so usually we do, helicopters. So flight sim is already kind of a niche hobby a little bit, and then helicopter flight simulation is like even another level. But of course, because it's flight sim, there's a community for that. So, whatever your individual interest in home flight simulation is, whether it's combat flying or airliners or air traffic control, there will be like a little subgroup that you can join. And so one of the helicopter subgroups, which is called helisimmer.com, you can look up his website. He's coming to talk more about how you can use different flight controls to fly helicopters in the sim, because of course helicopter flight controls are different than what we see with regular general aviation. And then we also have a developer, someone who makes helicopters for the simulator, who also flies them in real life, talking about how do they design flight dynamics differently in the sim for helicopters. So that's a nice example of one of these seminars where we're kind of bridging this gap, where you've got a real pilot who also makes helicopters for the sim, talking about how you can use this stuff for both the real flying and the virtual flying.
Yeah, it's always cool to hear from somebody who actually flies the actual aircraft.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so neat just to relate it to the actual simulation. It's just amazing how things have changed over the years. And that's something that I think has been over the years with FlightSimExpo. Things have really kind of grown, and you're seeing a bit of a change within the group there. Maybe you could kind of give us a little more color as to what you see now compared to the way it was maybe even 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back as far as your compact monochrome screen you were talking about before and look at how much things have changed. But definitely in the last 5 years, and especially since basically 2019, which is when Microsoft announced Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 and it came out the next year, we've seen just a tremendous difference and change in the flight sim community. Of course, the other big thing that happened in that time was the big C, COVID, and of course, people who were flying a lot didn't fly as much as they wanted to. That was true for airline pilots, general aviation, we all kind of got stuck inside. And so, unfortunate in some ways, obviously COVID was, but fortunate in some ways for our community, because a lot of people, right when Microsoft Flight Simulator came out, were stuck at home, and it just became this thing that a bunch of people picked up and have now continued on with. And we've seen just an amazing improvement in the visuals, in the performance of different flight simulators, in the abundance of choice that you have now with the airplanes and the scenery and the things that you can add to it. It was really good before, and it's just gotten incredible now just by how much more people have come into our community and how many more things there are to try. Honestly, the problem now almost tends to be a little bit of overwhelm, and it's like, well, gee, how do I actually get started in all this stuff? Because whereas before there might have only been a couple choices, now it just feels like you have the whole world in front of you, and really you do.
I wonder how much has been driven by hardware or by the actual software development and the more people getting into this. I mean, in your opinion, which ones is it, the hardware or the software and the people getting into it that are pushing it forward?
I think it's definitely the people getting into it beyond anything else, we've been able to see so much more interest in home flight simulation. And because you've gone from, if I'm guessing, having maybe like an active user base of, call it 700,000 or 800,000 people in 2019 to probably in the order of 3 or 4 million people right now, that's a huge difference in the just amount of infrastructure and investment that you can make as a developer like Microsoft, or even somebody like FlyInside who's making helicopters for the simulators. Of course, the software and the hardware side have really come a long way. I mean, Microsoft Flight Simulator sort of pioneered this concept of we're going to do a bunch of work in the cloud. And so instead of having you download a whole bunch of things and having those things sit on your computer, more and more of this is actually being driven from far away and being streamed into your simulator. So that's definitely helping on the performance side. And of course, with the way that we've seen graphics cards and CPUs improve, especially in the last few years with things like Bitcoin and various blockchain type mining things, we've kind of benefited from that in the flight sim world. So you're seeing better graphics cards, better CPUs, and all that's working together. But I think for me, the main thing is we've seen so many more people come into the hobby. That's really the impetus for developers continuing to make products. And I think that's why Microsoft is coming out with a new version of the simulator next year. Or this year,
and
I
you'll
guess.
find out.
It's 2024. Yeah, this year.
It's 2020. Yeah, it is 2024. That's what happens.
It better
with
be
COVID,
this year. They've dated themselves, so it has to be this year now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can find out more at FlightSimExpo.com about all these different things he talked about, because you're going to see all this. You're going to see the progression at Flight Sim Expo. You're going to see the people. You're going to be able to touch these things and talk to people. That's June 21st to 23rd, 2024, if you're listening to this right now. Also, always look at Flight Sim Expo. If you missed that, go to it next year. And by the way, just everywhere you go, it seems like you keep growing. So you're doing something right. And I think a big part of that is the community you built within the FlightSimAssociation.com. So tell us a little bit about that, the Flight Sim Association.
Yeah, and just to real quick finish off on Flight Sim Expo, if you can't make it, it's in Vegas, by the way, so really easy to travel to. Like, you just fly there, take a taxi to the Rio. You can spend the next 2 or 3 days at the Rio. You'll have plenty to do, trust me. So really, really easy show to take part in. By comparison, perhaps to Oshkosh or Lakeland, where you're like, okay, I've got to rent a car, or I'm flying in and I'm camping. So none of that. It's really, really easy, and it's a great show to be part of. But if you can't make it in person, we do have the online access. So we'll talk about Flight Sim Association in a second, but just $15, you can watch all the seminars from Flight Sim Expo from anywhere. And so that's a really easy way to still be part of the show and be able to support what we're doing, even if you can't actually make it in person. So let's talk about Flight Sim Association and the two and how they tie together. Really what Flight Sim Expo was originally was kind of this like once a year, let's just show off what Flight Sim can do. And then a bunch of people came to the show. They were new to home flight simulation. They were trying to figure out how to get started. And they're like, well, what came to the show, it was great. I learned all this stuff. But like, now I have questions. So where do I go? Like, I want to wait till next year to ask my questions. What do I do? And so we kind of realized, okay, we need a place that's available year round to people to give them resources, discounts, one-on-one coaching and support if they need that. And that's really where Flight Simulation Association came from. So it was born out of the show with people who had questions about how to get started, and it's really our answer to, okay, let's just make it a little bit easier for those who have questions, who want guides and resources. There's lots of ways to get involved in things, and ours is just one of many. There's wonderful resources available out there across the community, and this is really just our attempt to say, hey, if you guys have some questions, you want to just get a nice launching pad to this new hobby, Flight Sim Association is a place to do that. So our website, like you said, is FlightSimAssociation.com. You can join the association. It is free to join, and if you'd like, there is also a captain subscription, which I think you've done. Thank you for the support, by the way, Carl. And if you do want to be part of the association, help contribute a little bit, that's a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and there's many different ways you can help support the Flight Sim Association. Get involved and grow the community. I think that's the best part. And I'm glad you said that about the Flight Sim Expo, because I had forgotten about that. I can actually get on there and pay for access.
You get it for free, actually, because you're a captain. So included in that subscription, one of the many, many perks, you'll be able to watch all those seminars totally ad-free, live or recorded, anytime up until August 31st, and then eventually they end up on our YouTube channel. So it's all available to you, which is nice, included in that subscription.
One of the reasons you should join the Flight Sim Association is just that right there. I think that's perfect. It's and I was actually, as you were talking, looking around the website to make sure I did have access, but you just told me, and I'm very excited about that. I mean, like I said, there are a lot of us that want to go to all these events, and sometimes we miss out. But here's your chance. Become a captain and get on the Flight Sim Association, FlightSimAssociation.com. It's been a lot of fun for me, especially, and a lot of people say, well, airline pilots and professional pilots, why would you want to go out and go into a simulator? Well, there's a lot of cool things out there. It's different when you're doing it as a hobby. And sometimes you wind up flying something that you don't get to fly, or fly to places you never get to fly to. Or say you want to help somebody who has a simulator with the aircraft type that you fly in or you teach in. And I think that actually has been really, really wonderful. And this is another part of it too, and I think is absolutely wonderful. And I know I get a lot of feedback on this one, so I'm going to say it anyway. But there's a lot of forums that I'm on online that have to do with the airplane I fly, and they don't allow simmers in those forums, which I think is unfortunate, because a lot of the questions that flight simmers have are incredibly unique and challenging, and are really good for us as instructors. You can go to Flight Sim Association, and that's a really safe space to actually ask those questions, because nobody's going to get on you for being a flight simmer, because you are, and I think that's really important. So that's my 2 cents as far as getting involved with the Flight Sim Association, and I just love hearing the questions. I send feedback online and stuff like that, or actually through email, and say, hey, I think this is what you're looking for, and this is the difference between this version and that version of the airplane. But I digress. Other than being a member of the Flight Sim Association, one of the things that I thought was really cool is you coming to Sun and Fun, and just the organization reaching out. Tell us, and I saw you there, but I never got to leave the booth that we had. So tell us a little bit about the presence at Sun and Fun.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I mean, what you've just said there, lots of great stuff to unpack, but really that's what we're trying to do, is sort of bridge this gap between real flying and flight sim. Because why is there a difference? There shouldn't be any kind of a difference. And you've seen it in the instruction that you do. I've seen it in the instruction that I do, training pilots on the line. Sometimes the issue that we have at my airline is actually with radio work. And this may be surprising to people, but when you're new to the airlines, you may have come out of a 172. You may have never flown into a busy airport. In fact, it's possible you've never flown into a Bravo airport. And so if that's you, now you're being thrown into learning a new airplane in a 2-person environment. That's already hard enough. And you've got to fly into LaGuardia or DCA or Kennedy. These are busy airspaces. You've got to be on it. Your radio work has got to be excellent. And so if you're stepping into a Part 121 airliner, not having a ton of experience, I mean, why not go on VATSIM, on Pilot Edge, one of these free online air traffic control services, and practice this stuff? I mean, air traffic control phraseology is the exact same no matter where you are. You're just talking to somebody. So if you can get proficient with that before you have to get into an airplane, what an advantage that is, right? So when you talk about Sun and Fun, that was really our impetus for going. It's like, okay, well, let's try to show more pilots what this stuff can do. And so fortunately, actually, Sun and Fun, the folks who put that show on, came to our event, FlightSimExpo, back in Houston, and they kind of said, listen, could you do a small version of FlightSimExpo at Sun and Fun? And we're like, we think we probably could. So we worked with a number of organizations, almost 20 all in, including SimFab, who's down there in Florida. So that was a nice, easy lift for them. Some VR experience companies such as Virgineers and Pimax, and then basically 20 other companies to put this mini Flight Sim Expo together. We had almost 10 different demo stations that were set up as like an instructor-led demo. So you walked in, you signed up for free, we paired you with an instructor, and in about 10 or 15 minutes, they'd walk you through a scenario. So if you were like a student pilot, maybe we would take you on a VFR scenario and say, okay, well, let's like maybe spawn up here. We'll do a little bit of air work. We'll then fly in and we'll land. Or if you were an instrument pilot, we would actually put you on Pilot Edge and we'd spawn you in the air. We'd say, okay, here's kind of how everything looks. Let's program the GPS. Let's get vectors. We'll fly in ILS. We'll get a pop-up IFR clearance. The controller will give you the instructions and you'll fly it just like you would in real life. And we did that all the way through to carrier launches, 737 landings. We had the Sully scenario for kids to try if they wanted to take off out of LaGuardia in an Airbus and have the engines quit. So it was a nice mix of fun, of training, of realism, of different experiences, all trying to get pilots who may have heard of this stuff and kind of have an understanding to actually sit in that seat and see what it's like.
I want to work your booth next
Yeah,
year.
you should. You should come by. We'd be happy to do that and have you in
Man.
there.
I tell you sounds like so much fun, and that's one of the reasons that I thought it was great that you guys came to Sun and Fun, and something that's really neat. What you just said about air traffic control. I mean, whether you fly a J3 Cub and it's your first time flying into busy Orlando airspace, or you're flying a 747, it really does help.
Yeah.
I mean, I've sent so many people to the Flight Sim Association just for that one reason right there. It's huge how it helps you. It really, really is. So good point. I mean, that's something that's absolutely wonderful. Are we going to see you again at Sun and Fun?
I hope so. We're talking to them right now about how do we make this an annual thing. I mean, it's a huge commitment, not just for us at Flight Sim Association, but all the coordination that happens and all the partners who support this. We have people that are coming out of their day job to spend a week and a half in Lakeland. We had volunteers come by to support us. So it is a huge commitment, but it was a ton of fun. And just watching how many people, we did almost 1,000 demos over the course of that week. Again, structured, instructor-led demos, not a sit down and play, but like a real let's show you a good use case for how you might use this at home. And we showed a lot of people. One of the things we talk about, people kind of think when they hear home flight sim, they think like full panel, $10,000 setup with a lot of equipment. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if you can do that, but that's really not what you need in a lot of cases. One of the most helpful experiences that we had was literally a computer with a keyboard and a joystick. That's it. That's all you need plus a headset. And so here we're putting people on VATSIM, having them talk to air traffic controllers, having them learn about airspace and practicing this stuff with basically a $40 joystick and a headset that they already have. Like, it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think a lot of people, when they sat down and they tried that, they're like, wow, I don't need all this hardware and I can still get a great experience out of this. Again, we did have G1000 setups, we did have full panels, we did have virtual reality, and if you want to go down that pathway eventually, that's a totally nice thing to do. I mean, it definitely, the more you put into this in a lot of ways, you can definitely get more out of it. But as a starting point, it's really easy to get into, and that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to do this.
Yeah, just having a joystick and going out and flying,
Yeah.
I think that's terrific. I mean, that's how all of us got started. When I got a joystick, I was like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was way better than using the keyboard, which is how I started. And I was like trying to use these little arrow keys, and I'm like, wait a second, there's got to be an easier way.
Absolutely. Getting together with other simmers, I think, is absolutely terrific. There's all these big events. You got Sun and Fun, you got the FlightSimExpo. But say you want to get involved in a local level. Is there any way people could maybe do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, we're slowly starting to try to build that up, and it's not quite chapters the way that EAA has chapters, but that's sort of the idea. So on our website, there's a community tab, and under there's a section called local clubs. And we have about 10 or 15 different groups that have formed around the country and around the world where people will get together maybe once or twice a year, sometimes more often. I'm actually working to start one here in Toronto where we go to an air traffic control tour, and just here's a group of us, we're a bunch of flight simmers, we want to come and see how the tower works. And most facilities, the FAA and Nav Canada, are really receptive to that. They love having people come on tours, and so that's obviously a lot of fun for everybody, and that's a really nice way to get things started. One of our most active clubs of all places is in Cincinnati, and you're like, well, there's a bunch of flight simmers in Cincinnati, but apparently there are. And they've been doing monthly meetings at a library where somebody kind of talks about like what are they doing that's interesting to them in home flight simulation. So we are trying to build that up a little bit more. But in addition to the in-person stuff, obviously, a lot of this hobby is online as well. So like I said before, whichever your interest in flight sim is, there is a group or more that will do that kind of thing. So if you're somebody who's into combat flying, you want to look at a simulator called DCS, and there's probably a squadron that is like interesting to you. If you want to do helicopter flight simulation, you go to helisimmer.com, you'll find more information about that. If you want to build your own home cockpit components, you go to cockpitbuilders.com. So there's all these little subgroups, and in addition to maybe like an in-person meetup in your local area, you might also get involved in like an interest group, you might say, within home flight simulation that'll be people from all around the world, but they're all interested in the same subject. And then they might come as a subset to FlightSimExpo, and maybe you'd find that out of the 200 or 300 people in your interest group, there's like 10 of you that get to meet up at a show like this. And that's what it's all about.
And what happens is, just like when you're talking, you learn something new. Like you just talked about DCS, that digital combat simulator. Yeah. That's something that you can fly a jet, a fighter jet if you want. And maybe you never got the opportunity to do that in your life, but it really is realistic, and people have so much fun with it. But the way you find out about those things is going to the Flight Sim Association, the Flight Sim Expo, and talking to people like Evan that are passionate about it, and get involved in meetups and that type of thing. I think that's absolutely terrific.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, a big part of the Flight Sim Association this year, for me, something that's really kind of brought my thoughts to light, but it has hard stats, is the actual effectiveness of flight simulation on flight training, on actual flight training. And I think it's really cool that I think recently you guys came out with a report, and it's actually on your website, some of the highlights. So tell us a little bit about the effectiveness of home flight simulation on your actual flight training.
Yeah, I mean, we've been hearing this story for years, and it's my own story and yours too about how Flight Sim helps. But we were kind of wondering, okay, like, can we prove that? Like, if we actually got some data on this, and we went around and looked, and we really didn't see anything. So we just went out and did that ourselves. So we found just over 1,000 certificated pilots who are also flight simmers, and we basically said, okay, go back and look at your logbook. Tell me how many hours it took you in flight training to get your private pilot certificate. And then we said, okay, did you use home flight simulation purposefully as part of that? And about half did and half didn't. So what we did is we said, okay, well, let's look at how many hours did it take if you didn't use home flight sim, how many hours did it take if you did use home flight sim, and let's see if there's a difference there. And if it makes a difference, you'd expect that there would, of course, be a difference in hours. And there was. So it was about a 5.5 hour savings for those people who were using home flight simulation versus those who weren't. So small sample size, but a starting point to actually show, yes, there's an impact here. And if you compare the average to the national average, which according to the FAA is about 75 hours, flight simmers are getting their certificates in about 18 hours less than that. So just about 55, 60 hours total, which is really cool. So it's actually, a lot of people ask me about, like, can I put this in my logbook? And yes, you can log some of the time depending on what kind of device you're using and if there's an instructor present. But for us, it's more like, let's talk about what time you can take out of your logbook. Instead of paying those 6 hours or those extra 10 hours of training, put that money toward a home flight simulator. You're saving time in the airplane. You're more proficient when you do get to the airplane. You've already basically done the ultimate version of chair flying, whatever flight it is you're planning to do. And so we were able to, like I say, quantify that benefit within this small sample size. I don't think by any means this is the end. I think this is an interesting starting point, and I'd love to see the FAA or somebody else with maybe a bit more authority than we do to go and actually really explore this concept. But I think there's definitely some merit to it. And that's the pilot side. There's also an air traffic controller side too I can talk about in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that whole thing, it's not just the savings of time, it's also the effectiveness of that actual time that you're on there and the impact on your proficiency. I think, and I'm not sure how much has been done yet in studies, but I'm sure there will be in the future. But another really, and I'm glad you said this about air traffic control, because we've had quite a few air traffic controls that have been coming on and want to come on in the future on the show. But I think that's one of the parts of our industry that I think a lot of people don't know much about. But I think you guys have shined a light on that part of the industry. So do you have numbers to back that up?
Yeah. So, what's interesting about air traffic control is that, well, two things, I guess. One is not a lot of people know about that as a career. Like, pilot is already kind of a niche career, but people get it. When you say air traffic controller, like, I don't think anybody's going through high school going, I really want to be an air traffic controller. So that's one interesting thing. The other interesting thing is that with home flight sim, you can get a pretty good looking setup. You can get virtual reality. And I mean, from flying the real full motion level D simulators, they can look great, but they're not the same as the real airplane. Like, they're just not exactly the same. But flight sim air traffic control is exactly the same. So if you're a center controller and you're working in a facility, you're looking at a computer screen. Well, if I'm working as an air traffic controller on VATSIM, I'm also looking at a computer screen. And I've got a little headset like this with a push-to-talk key on it. And guess what? I'm looking at a radar screen that looks almost exactly the same as what the FAA controllers use. So it's a really interesting kind of world where we can actually really well recreate that. We can't create the tower environment quite as well, but the en route, so approach and center environments, we can create really well. So we talked to 14 FAA air traffic controllers who also have time in home flight simulators. And we kind of asked them the questions. Like, we did a little bit more of an in-depth type of survey with them. And we're like, okay, how does this help? Why is this valuable? And basically what we found is in almost all cases, online ATC, the work they'd done on VATSIM, was a huge factor in why they applied to the FAA. A lot of people said, I wouldn't have even thought about this as a career, except I got into this as a hobby, and then I went, oh, gee, I wonder if this is a career. And they found out that it was, and they met people in the FAA, and they talked to them, and then they went through the academy. And I'm looking at some of the results here. Basically, almost everybody out of that group of 14 ranked first in their class at the FAA Academy, and every single one of them checked out successfully at their first facility. And that is a pretty good statistic when you consider that at some facilities, the washout rate is like 30%. Like that's like even sometimes there's 70 or 80% washouts. So only 20% of people actually make it through when they do their first facility job. So that's really cool interest, just that we've been able to find that data. And what's also interesting is that there is a stigma within the FAA and at the Academy. You don't mention at the FAA Academy if you've been on VATSIM. That's a bad thing to them. You wouldn't put that in your application. You wouldn't talk about that in an interview. And that's strange because here we have these people who love this stuff enough to do it as a hobby, but the FAA doesn't want to hear about that. To me, that's a huge problem. And if we're looking at an air traffic controller staffing shortage right now and we're struggling to recruit people and have people move through the program effectively, well, here's a bunch of people who are doing this in their spare time. Why aren't we talking to them?
Absolutely. And I mean, I love seeing that when someone says, hey, I have this much time in a simulator, and I see that on a resume. I mean, that makes me feel like they're excited about doing this for a career, and that should be the same for air traffic control.
Right.
But what you just said proves the efficacy of this whole thing. I mean, this is just incredible that we actually have some data from talking to people about the successes because they've been involved with VATSIM or flight simulation at home and online.
Yeah.
Just don't tell the FAA about it.
Well, you don't say it anyway until you get to your facility, and that's that's fascinating to me. So here's and don't get me wrong, right? I'm not suggesting that we should take a VATSIM controller and put them in a tower any more than I'm suggesting we should take a flight simmer and put them in a flight deck right away. But it's proving their interest, their capability. They're already knowledgeable about airspace and procedures and letters of agreement and of course phraseology. So what a leg up they have by comparison to somebody who's coming in. Maybe there's some things that they have to learn that are a little bit different about the simulator world and the real world, just like we have to learn that when we get into the airlines, or just like you have to learn how to fly an airplane versus flying a simulator. Like, yes, of course there's some differences there, but come on, that's easy to overcome by comparison to somebody who's walking in off the street, never seen an airplane before, and we're trying to explain to them all the background that they need to know.
Absolutely. Look how many airlines use simulation to actually see if the person can qualify to be a pilot. To see if they have the skills, and there is talent there, and you can find that through flight simulation. So I totally agree with that. As a matter of fact, the one cool thing about like even simulation from home is, and I think I told you this, is that I actually used it at work. For my Fed ride for my captain upgrade, I was like, well, I know where I'm going on this trip, so why don't I just fly the route? Maybe not the whole route, but more so the arrival and the departure and the approaches and all that. And it was incredibly helpful. I couldn't log any of that time, but here I am getting ready for my Fed ride for upgrade to captain. And I wound up using a simulator just on my own to play around to see if I could figure, not just play around, but seriously think about myself going through this. And, by doing that, by envisioning my check ride, it went really well. So it did help me. And I think it helps a lot of people. But in general, and I don't want to make this all about flying, it is so much fun doing simulation. And there's things that you can do in the simulator that you can't do in real world, or you might be able to go to places that you couldn't go otherwise. And I think that's really cool. And the community is just absolutely wonderful and phenomenal, I think. So I think everybody should look at the Flight Sim Association as something to join. And Evan, I think a big part of this organization is because of you and the efforts you've put into it. And you're so passionate about it. And I think that without that voice and without that level of energy, I don't think this organization would have grown so much. And I know there's many other people involved in it. So I really appreciate what you've done for the organization. And it's been awesome.
Well, thank you. Look, I appreciate that. And I mean, the same could be said, of course, for Stuck Mic, AvCast, and aviation careers, right? Anything that's a passion project of someone's, you just love to see those things continue to flourish and grow. And you can always see that owner or founder's passion in whatever they've created. So I love stuff like that. But absolutely, like you said, it's a huge group of people that help support, that get involved. And really what it is there for is like, I went through this myself. It's a big part of my life. I'm literally living what it is that we're trying to create here. And I think if I can make it a little bit easier for the next people that come behind, so if they do want to do a one-on-one coaching session with the CFI in a flight simulator, whether that's for tech support or whether it's to learn more about flying, that wasn't possible when I was going through flight school, and it is possible now. And so I think stuff like this, it's just there to help all of us whenever we want it or need it, as we're kind of going through and getting into aviation for fun, for careers, whatever it may be.
You know, there's not a lot of time to sign up for the Flight Sim Expo, but they still can.
Yeah.
That's FlightSimExpo.com. It's June 21st through the 23rd, 2024. Even if you can't make it, actually, I think you should become a captain of Flight Sim Association, and then you can actually go watch these seminars online. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, really easy show to get involved with. There's no renting cars. There's no trying to figure out where your campsite is. We're at a hotel in Las Vegas. It's all air conditioned and it's all inside. There's running water, things that you don't always have on a campground. And it's a very easy show to come in and get involved with. If you are new to the hobby, as I said before, seminars that are totally free and included, tours that are totally free and included. We really want people who are new to this hobby to come to the show. And typically about 25-35% of the attendees, that's them. Brand new to home flight simulation. There's a group we have. It's an app called Discord. You may or may not know about it. If you register for Flight Sim Expo, you get access to our Discord. In there, of course, are a whole bunch of experienced flight simmers. I'm in there. You can ask questions. There's flight instructors in there. As Carl said before, if you've been afraid for whatever reason to ask a question about how does this airliner work, these are the kinds of places that you can ask those questions and feel comfortable getting an answer. And the folks who are answering are real pilots who are also flight simmers who can speak to, this is how it is in the real airplane, and the simulator version works like this, but you have to know about this little, thing that maybe is a bit of a quirk. So those are the kinds of answers you can actually get, which is great.
Yeah, there's a lot of synergies there, and I think that's absolutely terrific. And I'm so excited for the Flight Sim Association and Flight Sim Expo. Evan, this has been terrific. Anything else you want to say before we cut off here today?
It's always good fun talking with you, Carl. Thank you so much again for having us and for the kind words. It was great to see you. Obviously, it sounded fun there a little while ago. Hoping that becomes more of a regular thing. But till the next time we get to talk, it's been fun. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll see you back here on the campus of Sun and Fun. And if you're interested in going to the Flight Sim Expo, there's still tickets available. But if you can't make it out there, FlightSimAssociation.com. You can actually join as a captain. You get the discounts, like we said, with the scholarships guide. You can find out more at aviationcareerspodcast.com/free or stuckmikeavcast.com/free and use that coupon code PAYITFORWARD. And if you become a member, you do get a discount also. But do me a favor. If you're interested in anything we talked about, after we're done with this, go and take action. Go find this website, FlightSimAssociation.com, Flight Sim Expo. Start watching the videos, get on YouTube, but do something to keep your passion alive in aviation. Maybe you can't fly for some reason right now. Maybe it's medical, maybe it's financial, but you know what? There is a really a low bar for entry, both physically and also financially, and that's through flight simming. So I hope you will look at this. I really appreciate Evan coming here, and I appreciate your listening. We'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.